Awesome. All right, guys, I'm going to get into it now. So today's agenda, I'm going to provide a little bit of context around why we're doing this session. I'm going to talk about the employer mindset. I'm going to discuss with you negotiating with your employer. I'm going to draw upon some of the experiences of our success stories, and I'm going to give some time for our Q&A. So I want to first start off with a context piece. I'm sure all of you now know that the rules that will be changing on July 22nd will greatly affect a lot of the talent that's already in the UK or the talent that wants to come to the UK. But why are we the best placed people to speak about this inside of Migrates? Well, there's three reasons. One, we have now been working in this space long enough and have our own personal journeys that we have so much data to understand what makes a good candidate and also how and why a company would sponsor them. Two, we talk to employers. So what we've started doing is helping companies get their sponsor licenses, as well as actually, sorry, I'm just closing my window, as well as actually speaking to companies about potential opportunities within those organizations. And three, I think we've obviously been kind of beyond the employer, beyond the candidate side. We've been speaking to people within Parliament. We've been speaking to education providers. I was on a panel yesterday at UCL with Lord Balaria, who was there, who's an Indian national who now advocates for international students. And he made a whole address about the situation. So, we have a lot of information that now we know what is going to happen and how to navigate these changes. I will preface, I'm not an immigration advisor. We work with a lot of lawyers inside of Migrates, and we have a lot of relationships with them, but I obviously am not going to be giving any immigration advice during this call. We will have a session with an immigration lawyer in 2 weeks' time who will be discussing everything about the changes as well. So if you're a Migrates member, then please, kind of look into the calendar and see when that session is happening. If you're not, then feel free to join us and we'll be doing that session then. Awesome. All right. So, obviously, we all know that, well, if we don't know, because it's not obvious to everyone, as of July 22nd, the salary thresholds are going up. So it will be 33K for new entrants and 41K for skilled workers. Now, this is very important because the time that you can spend on a new entrant visa is going to be around 2 years, which means that the 33K that you are making as a new entrant will have to jump up to the 41K on a skilled worker visa after that 2 years is up. Now, of course, there's going to be provisions made for, people who are in, they will be discussing like the kind of skilled labor shortage gaps. But for the most part, people who want to get jobs within operations, business, marketing, finance, this is the situation that we're facing. 41K will become the new salary after your new entrant visa is up. Then we've got what's going to be happening after December 31st, 2026. And that is the scrapping of occupations on the target shortage list. So those are the lists. That list contains a lot of roles that will no longer be sponsorable unless the Migration Authority Committee, MAC, decides otherwise. So because of that, we're kind of, let's operate from the perspective that those roles will no longer exist until we know otherwise. That's just the way that we're going to handle this. Let's just go with what we know. And we know that, there's going to be quite a lot of roles that are going to be scrapped. So we'll be distributing this within the community afterwards, but, you can also access this information as part of the report that was issued. There will be roles within the digital sector, within the creative sector, within the legal sector, financial and business sector. And there is obviously discussion around what will actually happen to those roles, whether or not there will be new roles that will come up, whether or not it will become global talent visa positions. But just for the sake of this conversation and argument, let's just pretend that these roles will no longer exist. So you have a limited time frame to get on these tracks if that is the track that you wish to go down. And we will be discussing why the Home Office has done this and what the legal implications of it are on the session with the immigration lawyer that's going to be taking place in 2 weeks. So yeah, I mean, like I said, some of these roles might stay. Some of them will likely disappear, and some of them will be merged or shifted, whether or not it's to the global talent visa route or other routes that might come up that we don't know yet because they're still in discussion of what the future will look like. So the jump from the 33 to 41K is really steep. And I just want to be honest here because it's important to do that with the migrates kind of community. That jump is a high one. So when it comes to your own job hunt, really you should be looking at roles that are already at that 33 to 35K ballpark. So really be thinking strategically about the kinds of companies that you are trying to apply at, the kinds of salaries that they're offering, the industries that they're in. We speak a lot about this inside of Migrates, which companies typically sponsor or which industries are sponsoring. And truly, my belief is that if there's anything in deep tech, healthcare, but kind of more on the private sector side of things, that is the companies and the roles roles within those companies you should be looking at, given the fact that they will likely have higher salaries, especially if they focus on business to business relationships. I think anything consumer facing is going to be a lot harder to get a job that is going to be over 33K. And sadly, also for creatives, that does mean that you might have to reassess the kinds of roles and the kinds of companies that you need to be applying at. I mean, I would, okay, actually, my personal feelings aside, let's not get into my personal feelings because then we'll be here all night. So that jump is something that you need to be considering as you are job hunting or in your current employment, thinking about what is your current salary. Can you match that 33K as of July 22nd onwards? And making that jump to 41K, is that feasible for your current situation? Okay. Now let's talk about the employer mindset, because I know that a lot of you are trying to understand, what will employers be thinking about and kind of how they might be tackling these changes. So I think that, and I mean, I don't even think, I know a lot of businesses might not be fully aware of the oncoming changes. When you think about it, we as international talent, we will always be aware of what's happening. But a lot of companies still think that the resident labor market test exists, or don't know about the graduate visa, or don't know that there's a new entrant salary, right? So they might see the headlines, but they might not fully understand what those headlines mean, which actually you can use to your advantage, because that means that you can become the educator internally about what is happening and how that might affect your future of work within the organization. So I would tell everyone who is currently employed to use this window to negotiate early before the rules tighten. And what I mean by that is creating a plan, creating a kind of strategy by which you bring this up with your employer and strategically let them know about the allowances you are given as a result of being a new entrant or potentially, switching from the graduate visa onto skilled worker track. And even if you are currently on a skilled worker visa, explaining to them the rules that pertain to when you got your skilled worker visa, because obviously for some people pre-April 2024, the rules will be different. Post-April 2024, the rules will be different. So really you need to understand exactly how the rules affect your personal situation. For the most part, everyone on this call, or most people on this call, will be either on a graduate visa or, I think most of you will be on the graduate visa, looking to kind of get into the skilled worker track. So for you, that 33K threshold is very important to understand and to be able to explain to employers. Does that mean that you need to start telling employers that you have to jump to 41K after 2 years is up? No, I would use that to your own discretion. But I would consider, how has your salary looked like in the last 2 years that you've been working there? Has there been a jump in your salary? And would there be a significant jump up to the 41K? Because that is what will be required of you, of course, when that time comes, unless you change to another employer and potentially get a salary rise as a result of that as well. Okay, so employers and why they sponsor. So I think for many of you who are already employed, you have this advantage where you have built a relationship with your employer. Whether or not, you have been there for 3 months or 6 months or a year, that employer obviously to this day, I would hope, values the work and the effort that you're doing, right? So employers sponsor for 3 different reasons, but a lot of the time it's a combination of the 3. You fill a skills gap. So you have a certain skill set, which is harder to hire for or more difficult to train up. You create value or you generate revenue. So you don't always have to be in a sales role in order to generate revenue. But for example, if you're simplifying internal systems or if you are collaborating with teams which do generate revenue, in one way or the other, you are essentially affecting the the way that the company's kind of future growth plans and trajectory. And then, replacing you will be costly because recruitment costs are actually quite significant. And replacing talent is difficult when the talent is already doing the job to the level that the employer is looking for you to fulfill. But before we kind of jump into, what and the more in-depth elements of this, I do think that you have to think about this from your own perspective and analyze and write down all of the things that you have personally done throughout the duration of your time at this company and ask yourself, would you meet some of these criteria? Are your skills irreplaceable? Have you brought value to your employer? Have you built the relationships internally in order to solidify your own placement within the organization? Because a lot of the time it is also relationship based. And if you are able to find that internal advocate for you, it becomes much easier to negotiate sponsorship because essentially you have someone who is on your team and kind of backing your corner. So let's go to the next slide. So as I was discussing this, this is the reality, right? Hiring is expensive. Training up staff is very expensive, and sponsorship could very well be the cheaper and the smarter option. So if you're thinking about how you're going to negotiate this, taking that approach is actually a very valid one, because essentially if in all doubt, the employer is saying, we're not sure, I don't think this is going to work out, you can actually draw up, the cost of rehiring for the role and the length of time it would take to find said candidate, as well as the cost of the visa. And 9 times out of 10, that cost of hiring new talent is going to be more expensive for the employer because there's a lot of different factors that come into play with this. It takes a longer time to hire someone. You have to go through multiple hiring rounds. You have to pay a recruiter. You then have to give a percentage of the fee to the recruiter if it's an external recruiter. If it's an internal recruiter, you're still using company resources to essentially, hire somebody new. So it's about the way that you position it, but this is a very strong way of thinking about this. If you start thinking, I am too expensive to be replaced, I actually think that your mindset shift also occurs and you start to consider what actually entails the cost of sponsoring you as an individual. It's going to be 3 or 5K. Even if you look into, I obviously don't know everyone's industries here, and it does vary industry by industry, but if you actually did a little bit of research around what is the traditional kind of recruitment and rehiring and retraining costs for an individual of this level in this industry, just ask ChatGPT and see what the answer comes out with, because I'm telling you, it's likely going to be a lot more than it is to sponsor. With sponsorship, there's this perception of high cost and high admin kind of time consuming and admin related burden. But the reality is that a lot of the time it doesn't actually translate into that. And admin can be made really simple and easy if you use an immigration advisor or a platform like Borderless, for example. And the cost of it, whilst yes, it does cost money, at the end of the day, if you frame it in a way to an employer and saying, this is actually, if you disperse it over the 3 years you are sponsoring me for, this is how much it actually costs on a monthly basis, giving them that kind of breakdown of the number is actually very helpful for the employer to think about it from a new perspective. So you have to understand these key components before you start to talk to your employer about it, which is why I encourage you to do the research, to understand a little bit about the space that you're working in, and also kind of start thinking about the ways that you have been showcasing value. So let's get into negotiating with your employer. I want to get a kind of answer in the chat. Has anyone in this call tried to discuss this with their employer? Please feel free to write. Okay, yes. Lots of people have said yes. Okay, and Danielle's saying he's about to do that this Tuesday. Oh, hi, Danielle. Actually, it's been a while. Okay, awesome. So a lot of you are discussing this with employers, or you have discussed this with employers. So Clearly you guys know how to bring up this conversation. Can I just get like a 1 or 2 word answer? Why do you think if they said no, what was the answer that they gave, or why do you think they gave that certain answer? Just so that I get a sense around what's being said in the room or what people's experiences have been. Checking into costs. Costs. Okay, cost cutting. Yeah. Cost is always a big thing. Salary. Yeah. Bureaucracy at a big corporate. Yeah. More time to prove my worth. Salary band. Bureaucracy. Yeah. Sponsoring, you need to have skills that are replaceable. Board approval. Ooh. Yes. So, okay, people still, high graduation company, no strong business case, there is no skill, no to sponsor, and a large corporate, correct reason. Only able to sponsor healthcare unless they're new skilled. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you guys. That's really helpful. So I think a lot of it comes down to cost and bureaucracy, and also skills that are irreplaceable, which is really interesting because on that point, I would argue that at the end of the day, you can have a lot of skills, but who you are as an individual is a completely different component. And I'm going to say something that is going to sound quite harsh, and I have been in this situation, so I don't want you guys to feel like I'm being sorry, I'm just looking at the comments that are still coming in. So Danielle, I'll return back to that point. If you can leave that question for the end, I can return to it. A lot of it comes down to as well how likable you are within the organization. And that is something that you can't measure because sometimes even you can be super, super likable and everyone like loves you and values your work. But then someone in HR says, no, sorry, we're not going to do this. And then you're kind of back on square one. There's some things that we have validated now as at Migrates within our own experiences and with, like I said, working with employers. Small businesses are much more likely to do this because they are the ones that struggle with hiring, retention, and also kind of, the ability to just have the kind of bandwidth to go out there and try to hire someone new, et cetera. There's less bureaucracy, less people to answer to, less budgets, less kind of people to say no. And I appreciate that some of you might be in larger businesses. So you're thinking, how is this helpful for me? I want you to take that same approach, but within your organization. So if, let's say, for example, you work at a large company, think of your team as a small business. The most important person within that structure is likely going to be the lead director, the manager, etc. Before you go to the VP, the manager, the director, speak to the person that you are the direct line of report to and inform them that you want to build a business case, that you want to showcase the things that you can bring to the business and the way that you view your future within the organization as well. This is the thing, like you have to be such an advocate of yourself in this process. It's really challenging, especially if you don't necessarily always feel confident in doing so. But by showing your employer, let's say, for example, so within Migrates, we have the business case deck, right? Which you can use to make your own. But let's say in that kind of example, you were able to break down the costs. You were able to give them a graph in stating, by the way, this is exactly how much it will cost you over the next 3 years on a monthly basis, so that they have some understanding around the actual breakdown of this cost and what it truly means. I would also offer up solutions, paying the visa back if you have to leave within like a certain time frame, which some people have done and have been successful in doing so. Offsetting some of the visa in your salary, which I appreciate might not feel very comfortable for everyone. But if it's something that you can negotiate, definitely potentially discuss doing so. And yeah, essentially just like creating a kind of presentation for them so that they understand the cost associated with it, the predicted timelines, and how you can support in creating like a much smoother process for them, whether that's by introducing them to a solicitor that you know. And if you don't know a solicitor, please come to Migrates. We can introduce you to some really good ones, or using a platform. Again, if you need an introduction to the guys at Borderless, we've actually placed talent at Borderless, so we know them very well. We can also support with that. But anyway, the legal side of things, if they need support with, you just have to show that you know the individuals that they can rely on if they want to kind of invest into that. If they already have a solicitor, that's great, but I would also do everything that you can to speak to the solicitor and just explain your situation and inform them that, you know, you are aware of this process, you know how it works. The transition from the post-study visa to being a new entrant is not necessarily a very complicated one. It's just an extension, essentially, of your visa track, but it's a new category, and you know about the new entrant rules that pertain to you if that's the case in your case, because some of you might be on the YMS or on the HPI, and those are different visas, and you might not necessarily fit on the new entrant track. But again, it's all about just building that business case that you need to make sure that they understand exactly what entails to sponsor you. Sorry, I kind of jumped ahead. But I wanted to talk about like when your employer is sponsor ready. So these are kind of the criterias for getting your foot into sponsorship with an employer. First and foremost, you need to have been there for over 6 months. If you want to have some moat in the discussion. If you're just there for a month, I think it's way harder to bring up visa sponsorship. Although one of our success stories, Pushbacks, did do that, and she has been successful. However, it's still important to kind of delay it until you can showcase value and, you know, proof in the metrics and performance and the reviews that you've received, the kind of accolades that you've gotten from internal players within the business. They've sponsored before. So companies that have a sponsor license they kind of have their own process. They will have the compliance in place. They will know how it works. Smaller businesses, like I said, have less of a knowledge about it, which can be used to your advantage because they will not necessarily know the full extent of it. And that's your opportunity to educate them and own the process. Very important as well to own it. You're filling a critical role. So this is a bit more difficult to measure, especially when you are early stage talent, but filling a critical role can also mean, you know, that you are just a great addition to the team, that you are, like I said, well-liked, that you have the friends, the support, that you've worked with clients or you've worked on a project. You have something to showcase that you have been like working evidently within the organization and doing a good job. And then you have your manager and senior supports. Go ahead. Very important. I have always approach this conversation in a very candid way, in a way that like plays on emotion. And honestly, it's been genuine because this is truly one of the most stressful things to go through as an immigrant, as an international talent. Like it is so difficult to get people on your side. But then when you have that one person, they will vouch for you as well. And I've seen it happen with other Migrates members where they have had people that have been like, you know what? Yes, like I want to help you make this place your home. So you need to explain to them your journey, how long you've been in the UK, how you've made it your home. If you have a partner, if you have friends, if you've laid your roots here, you really need to create that story and be genuine and honest, even if it feels unnatural or uncomfortable. It's something that is a big deal for you. So I do think that it's worth you kind of coming at it from the perspective of, this is my life, this is my home, this is where I am settling roots, and I would love to continue working here and adding value to your organization. But I also want to tell you my story and how I got here to begin with. Because even if they haven't done it before, they can. Like there's 130,000 companies that sponsor in the UK. 60 are added daily, every single day to the list. That number may have gone up or down. This is when I last checked back in April. And there's millions of companies that exist in the UK. So there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of companies out there that just don't yet know that this is something that is available to them. So your job in this situation, whether or not they have a license or they don't, or they do or they don't, is to educate them on your situation and showcase the kind of key areas of what you have added and why you are someone that can kind of stay and grow and continue working within the organization as well. So the step-by-step. So I think like, yeah, I've given a lot of kind of wishy-washy, well, maybe you guys might not think that. I've given a lot of general overview. But I think that if you're thinking about it from how do I lay this out, like what are the steps that I go through? So showcasing your past wins, like gathering all the data that you have on the work that you have done or additional work that you are doing. So maybe you want to start a project internally about, you want to create an AI agent for your team or something that's going to help them with making things happen quicker and faster. You really have to think outside the box here. Like, what is something that your manager really struggles with, or your team is struggling with, or, the business, you can tell that they need help in a certain space. And can you be the person that proactively raises their hand and actually gets involved so that you can kind of add to the impact and the results that you're driving? If that doesn't even exist, can you become someone that is like an internal, like if you're working in a startup, it would probably be more like an internal vibes manager. But no, can you like start a little group within the business? Can you create like a space for within the company that does something outside of work, but where you are creating that kind of legacy and that impact? Maybe it's like a little club, maybe it's a volunteering thing. Can you do that so that there's a clear emphasis on how you're not just being a good business fit, but also a good culture fit? And that's when you can actually pitch your long-term value. So once you have gathered those wins and been able to kind of put them, whether it's in a business case profile or potentially, write them all out and make sure that you have it all kind of listed and clearly showcasing the value that you've done, that's when you need to start building up that pitch. And it's the same way with an interview when we're practicing like, why me? Or tell me a little bit about yourself, which we teach a lot inside of My Grades. You have to really go hard with the way that you pitch your long-term value, because companies, like I said in the beginning, will care about the skill set that you have, the value that you're bringing, the revenue that you're generating, and your overall kind of contribution. And if you can show them that you can do all of those things, that is like a winning package for a lot of employers, because why would they then go out and find other talent to hire? And then bringing in the advocate is kind of like that final step, because by that point, you want to present something to that advocate and explain to them, this is my situation. Can we, talk about it? Can we build kind of a presentation to give to someone more senior about my, this process? I really want to make it happen, and I'd love it to get your kind of buy-in as well. So this is why being a little bit later in your journey with working for that employer is really important. All right. So how do you lead with that kind of confidence and clarity in your intent, right? So like, you need to start using the words that are like their trigger buzzwords. I'm committed to staying and growing here. Saying things like, I see the future of my career in this business for the next 3 to 5 years. I'm going to tell you guys something. It doesn't have to be true. I have been sponsored 3 times at 3 different employers. I told every single one of those employers that I would be there for a long time. I wasn't, because I just, many different reasons why, but the employer doesn't necessarily need to know that. And I know that there's an element of like feeling bad about it. I actually felt that way in my final skilled worker visa when I left them for another company. But the reality is that you are still like, people leave for, okay, sorry, I'm going to give the good PR answer. The reality is that businesses change and they go through redundancies. People's jobs are not as safe as they have previously been. And realistically, when you are on a visa, you always have to be making sure that you are networking, meeting people, that you have contacts and connections. It's really, it's a lot of work outside of work to ensure that, if there were any ever moment in time when you would have to switch jobs, that you could do it without having too much kind of stress on your shoulders. So that is not being deceitful. That is just actually ensuring that you will have a safety net and something to fall back on. But obviously, when you're talking about this with employers, there's an importance in saying to them, I'm committed to staying and growing, and I want to kind of grow in my journey here, etc. The discussion around cost, I think it's a little bit more delicate, but if you're able to talk about this with an employer and tell them, this process of sponsoring me is actually going to be more cost effective than rehiring for you in the long run. And I've crunched the numbers and I can actually present them to you if you're interested in seeing them. That's a way better approach than saying to them, this is going to cost you less than hiring someone new. Because that's obviously a direct stance, but it's not one that is more delicate and, in consideration of what they might be thinking about. And then the final one is more around, what you've learned and what you're kind of proposing off the back of it. So telling them about your key learnings. And that is really the discussion around the cost, the time it takes, the future progression of your time there on a visa, etc. So I think if hopefully that gives you a clear enough picture that you have to be proactive, informed, and solutions focused, but you also have to own the process. And that's not something that has been written down here, but the moment that this gets handed off to somebody else, you are no longer owning the process. Like every single situation when I was in with getting sponsored, I was speaking to HR. Like even though I was maybe butting in, I would still do like a check-in with HR. I would say, hey, by the way, like, do you mind if we just have a quick catch up on this? I'd really love to know where we're at. I know that my manager is really busy. I just love to understand like where this is progressing, because that kind of element of being involved with them is important in the relationship building, so that they can actually care about your situation, and two, so that you can tell which direction it's going, whether it's going to lead to a positive result or or a negative one. Okay, so common pushbacks and what they'll say. We don't have a license. So you can go back to them and say, not to worry, I'm part of an organization called Migrates. They can help you apply. It's simpler than you think. I do 15-minute consultations for free with employers. I'm not a legal advisor. I don't do any of the legal work. What I will do is understand their situation, explain to them, how we work, and introduce them to someone who is very cheap to work with, who's our legal aid, and she will kind of take them off and do the process with them. And she's really great. Again, she makes a company feel really comfortable in the process. And I think that can be, essentially really helpful for businesses when you need to bring in like a third party to vouch for you. The next one is, we're not sure about the rules. So that's when you need to tell them, like, I've done the research and like, here's what actually applies to us. I'm a new entrant. This is how much it costs. If they don't know what will happen in the future, you can tell them to your own discretion. You can say, eventually I will need to go in a higher salary band. But given that, we're only looking to sponsor for 2 years, let's just see where that kind of takes us. And it's too expensive. I think, again, that we've kind of discussed that a little bit about recruitment costs and how much this actually costs, etc., and breaking down that cost for employers. If their final kind of verdict is it's still too expensive, then, and you've done everything, you've tried to say, hey, I'll offset some of the cost of the visa and my salary, or we can have a clause in the contract that says if I leave for whatever reason, I have to return some of this fee. But it's up to your discretion how much you want to offer. I wouldn't say like you should say you'll pay for the whole thing, because actually that's not even technically allowed. Companies do have to pay for the visa, at least for their side of it. So I think to that extreme, if they're still saying no, then I think you have to kind of cut your losses and try to think about what comes next as well. So what we've learned today: don't wait for December 2026. Your action items are as follows. You need to identify if your role is going to be affected. So if after December 2026, it will cease to exist in its current format. Prepare your case, and then schedule a conversation with your employer. And actually that should say with your advocate, because that advocate can be someone just a little bit more senior than you. It can be your manager. It can be someone in a different team, but it needs to be someone that you trust, that you've worked with closely enough to know that they will have some kind of a decision, or they will be able to kind of influence the way that this process is going to unfold. So I just want to also end, before we go into Q&A, with some success stories of Migrates, because honestly, every single one of these individuals was in a very similar boat to you. The rules had just changed. So this was back last year. And they still managed to secure visa sponsor jobs with very limited time remaining on their visas. Catherine had less than 6 months. She managed to get a job with a company that didn't even have a license to sponsor. Mahima managed to convince her employer to go down the kind of visa sponsorship route when she joined after she passed probation. And the same thing with Nadine. She had it in her contract that after probation, she would, get reviewed and they would look to sponsor her visa. So what you notice with all of these 3 individuals, and actually I picked them kind of at random, but they all are adjacent to marketing and kind of communications roles. I know all of their stories really well. I've worked with and helped with all 3 of these individuals. They were so good at advocating for themselves. Like, honestly, Catherine killed it. And she got offered a job with sponsorship in the interview, which is incredible. But they just noticed how hard she worked, how she went above and beyond an interview, and they were like, okay, we're in. Again, though, small business, less bureaucracy, and actually very British, very British old business, like as in it's been around for a long time. Mahima, very similar situation. She knew her value. She knew she had a previous experience working in communications in her home country as well. And she was still able to talk about that and discuss the kind of new perspective that she could add. But she really focused specifically on a sector, went for it, got a job at that company, and again, very small organization, has managed to convince them to get their sponsor license and sponsor her. And the same with Nadine. Nadine's company already had a sponsor license, but she was, again, such a great candidate, got the job, proved her worth in the business. And it's a much bigger company, actually. It's Papier, so it's a lot bigger than others. But they saw her value and they were like, she's got a really great skill set. We don't want to lose it. So all of these people managed to do it, which means that hopefully you can too. But of course, there are still things outside of your control that just because there's a lot of great success stories doesn't mean that they haven't also had their fair share of rejections and no's, because they have. That's why they joined Migrates, right? So yeah, I think it's worth knowing as well. So cool. I'm going to leave some time open for the Q&A. I'm going to open up the floor for questions around people's situations. I will say that, I'm kind of opening up the floor to everyone. If you have questions that I'm not going to answer here, you're welcome to come to Migrates Q&A. I'm doing the one on Monday, so we can answer those questions as well. If you're not a Migrates member, unfortunately, this is kind of the only time that I can help. So, awesome. All right, let's just see some of the questions come through. So the first one was from Danielle, and hers was her company's liaising with solicitors. Danielle, are you able to unmute yourself and just explain a little bit about the situation? Okay, I'll just answer it then, I guess. Otherwise, because I don't want to skimp on time. Oh, actually, it wasn't a question, so it's all. I guess it's all good. It was just a comment. So yes, likability is something I've recently learned the hard way. Yes. Okay. Akshat, I'm going to focus this question more around those who have who are working and who need to kind of convince their current employer, because that's kind of the session's focus. But you're welcome to come to a Q&A with Migrates if you're currently a paying member. So Mustafa, you've recently passed probation and it was a success. Your post-study visa ended in December, and when you joined, you told them that your partner's on a skilled worker visa and you can get a dependent visa. They explicitly mentioned that in my offer as well. The role is basically dependent on maybe figuring out my visa. Salary is $28K and the company's a bit stingy. It's a small company, and it's a junior role. Is it still possible to convince them to sponsor me, or should I focus on a company that would sponsor me? So you told them that you were going to get on a dependent visa. So I'm a little bit confused.
So my partner, she is. Oh, sorry, sorry about that. My partner, she's on a skilled worker visa, and our plan B for me to be here in the UK. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Was to apply for a dependent visa on her, but I'm trying as much as I can to be dependent, actually, independent from that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here. So
Understood.
is that even possible? Like that jump was already big, and now after the white paper and what's happening, it became bigger. It went from around 30K to 33K, as you just mentioned, and it's going to take another leap.
Yeah, it's going to be a big leap. Yeah. I think, honestly, this is a situation where you need to talk candidly to your employer and just ask them if it is something that they're open to considering. If the answer is no, because of the leap in salary cost for them already, then potentially you can explore going down the dependent route or start looking for new roles. It's, given the fact that you've had a little bit of experience already, it's useful and when you're kind of going to be interviewing for your next position. Having said that, though, I would really understand why you don't want to go down the dependent route. Obviously, you don't need to talk about this on a Q&A with 53 people. I get it. However, just think about, why don't you want to do that? It could potentially safeguard you for at least a year. If you're on the dependent visa, you're kind of getting enough experience working in this organization. And then if you want to switch onto a skilled worker after that time has passed, can you do that in a new company where your salary will actually be higher as a result? So yeah, remember that, like, kind of, I would take it from that perspective.
Right. Thank you so much.
No worries. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna go on to Amira. So or sorry, Daniel. So sorry, Daniel, what was your question that you'd love to ask?
Yeah, so I'll be very quick. I've got 10 months left on my visa. I've been working for my current employer for the last 7 months. It's Havis. My company is super open to sponsorship. However, a pattern that I've observed is they sponsor an individual at the very end of their post-study work visa, which is approximately either 1.5 year or 2 years. With the changing rules, I'm quite skeptical of how this would turn out to be for me in my case, and especially since I don't match the salary band. What's the best way to go around it? Should I ask for an early sponsorship or should I explore other options?
So sorry, so I'm a little bit confused. So they said that they won't sponsor you, even though they have been open to it.
We haven't had the chat yet. I've
Oh, you
just,
haven't had the chat.
yeah.
And is the salary significantly under the 33K mark?
Oh no, it's 5,000. I'm making
5K under.
27,500. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and when is kind of the next stage of promotion? Like when are you due for that?
It's not really fixed. Honestly, it's highly discreet on the director,
Mm,
but it's in a couple of months, most probably January.
okay. And your visa ends in 10 months,
M-
so that would kind of
May,
put
end of
May
May. Yeah.
May of next year. And do you know the salary band for the director level?
For the senior exec level, it's up to 35,000, which I would match. So honestly,
Mm,
it's not really that difficult. In a lot of cases, the individuals that got sponsorship, their directors were really good advocates of them. Again, I
yeah.
really related to this presentation. So yeah, it's
Do you
it's
like the
very
company?
sorry.
Do you like the company? Do you
Uh
want to continue working there?
that's another conversation. I'm considering moving, but I'm not sure. I really want to extend my stay in the UK for the time being.
Well, you've got 10 months, so you could essentially, I mean, you're kind of in a situation where it's gonna actually boil down to what you want to do, which is not really so much of a negotiation with your current employer. I think you're going to have to make a decision around whether or not you see a future in this business. If you do, then potentially going and getting into like into the director level or the senior exec level and getting onto that higher salary band will allow you sponsorship regardless. So then you won't necessarily even have to think about, going elsewhere. I would maybe have this conversation with your employer probably around the September, October mark and just tell them, by the way, like I will require visa sponsorship and I want to align myself for a promotion. Is this something that we can discuss and like just see if it aligns with your own business strategy, and just see what they have to say on the kind of matter. But I would, in your case, still be like light looking at other employers as well and other roles, just in case that something might come up where you might be a really great fit, and as a result, like they might want to kind of go through that process with you sooner. But it sounds like you're a little bit like unsure of what your next step is anyway. And yeah, I feel like you kind of have to figure that out before deciding whether or not you want to negotiate sponsorship with them.
I agree. Just a quick follow-up question. In case of a
Daniel, I'm
new,
really sorry.
yeah,
I've got only
got it.
2 minutes left, so I'm gonna have to go on to another
Perfect.
person. But you're welcome to I think you're welcome to definitely like ask it at another time as well. So okay, so I've got a question from Amira, which is, at first my employer thought it was not feasible to sponsor me, but after I sent them the negotiating email from Migrates, yes, we have now been negotiating my sponsorship for the past month. I'm so happy to hear it. I'm in a consulting company and it's very much based on clients' charge out rates. How should I keep the conversations going with this new salary in case for new entrants? Okay, so they're going to increase your salary to 30,900, but with the new salary from July 22nd, you're afraid they might be skeptical and both back don't wanting to sponsor again. Okay, so I think in this case, you need that. I mean, it depends on whether or not they have been. You haven't actually mentioned around what they have said around the salary threshold. Um, they already know that, okay, right, so they needed to increase your salary, but now they have to further increase it. Understood. So I think it depends as well on when your visa expires. But what you can say to them is like, look, I really want to stay in this organization, especially given that they are focused on clients and charge out rates. I don't know if you have any direct impact with the clients that you work with, or if there's any possibility for you to focus on doing a little bit of new business as well. But you can ask them for kind of like a performance-based review for sponsorship. So let's say if you give them like 2 months and you say to them, like, I want to kind of exceed my targets by X amount, or work on this number of clients, or, do this many hours of work. You're basically kind of giving them like you're putting yourself in a situation where you also have to fulfill your end of the bargain, but you're giving them an opportunity to see like that value in you, and as a result, potentially kind of negotiate sponsorship as well. So I would actually tell them about this if they're already going through the process, because the 30 to 33K jump anyway is going to be something that they will find out about unless they sponsor you in the next 12 days. So I think that I wouldn't necessarily go. I would probably speak to the person that you trust that has been working on this. Just pull them aside. Don't do it over email. Talk to them in person and just say, look, they've actually just bumped it up a little bit further. I still really want to make this work. I'm open to hearing kind of the things that the business needs from me. But I also thought that maybe what we could do is I could kind of go on a value-based like proposition that can show you that, I am capable of this salary mark, etc., and see what they have to say on that point, because that might land to further kind of conversations. Aylin, so your probation ends this month. Awesome. You're currently doing a digital marketing for a small startup. Great. Love to hear it. You're the only full-time employee in the business. Not so great, but it's cool. Your salary is much lower than the minimum requirement. What do you think I should mention on the case when presenting to the employer, given that they were not directly new clients for marketing? So that's fine. The thing is that with a much lower salary, it's really hard to kind of negotiate that jump. So I think you kind of need to be honest in these situations when your salary is a lot lower than the new threshold, and just explain what kind of the rationale for this behind the government. But also, I mean, actually the rationale is, I don't even know the rationale myself, but what you need to say is there's these new set of rules that are happening, and then factor in how much time you've got left on your post-study visa. So if in the next, you can ask your employer, like, I know I've just finished my probation. I hope, like, what do you think of the work that I'm doing? First, lead with that. I think I would ask for a performance review and see what they have to say about the work that you're doing, before you kind of jump into explaining, the new rules, the new changes, etc. And then ask them about the kind of time frame that you have and say, look, I have this amount of time until my visa expires. Do you think it's feasible for me to obtain a higher salary threshold, a higher salary band in that time frame? Because I do really want to make it work. And see what that employer says. You have the benefit that it's a really small business and clearly, like, they need you. I don't know how long you've got left on your visa, but sometimes that can be, if you have more time on your visa, then that could help as well. So the next person asks is, do we need a baseline salary to negotiate sponsorship? Well, whatever the new entrant salary will be. If it's, I would say between 31 to 33, between 30 to 33K, given I don't know how long you've got left on your visa, but if you are just on your post-study visa, you're on 29, 30K, that kind of jump to new entrant in 2 years is not a big one. But just remember that the jump from new entrant to the 41K is going to be a big one. So that's the one that you're kind of need to be thinking about ahead. So sorry, I'm just going to answer that one question because I've got a lot of questions coming in. So Godfred's asked, I've got a graduate job that starts in September. Even though the company mentioned in the advertisement that they don't offer sponsorship, I was still offered the job. I would like to know what stage I'm at for presentation. When do I bring the conversation for sponsorship up? So I wouldn't bring it up until you actually start the role. They did mention that they don't offer sponsorship. I'm not sure if they knew about your immigration status. It sounds like they didn't. That's a really tough one, because if they say they're not going to sponsor, then I would take that again at face value. They most likely have some kind of internal policy in place where they don't sponsor entry-level talent, or they just don't sponsor at all. I would potentially see if it's worth you working there for a little bit to get that experience on your CV, and then pivoting into a new organization, because at least you'll have some UK-based experience, which could be helpful. How do you get into one-to-one coaching solely for sponsorship? Okay, it's really expensive if you want to work with me personally. I will drop the link here. Otherwise, I would advise that you go and join Migrates, because we've got loads of resources inside if you're not already a member. Okay, so then Toshiba has asked, I'm planning to push through the make an application for 22nd of July, but my SOC will be on the TSL after 22nd. Just anxious about all of this. From experience, do you think I have enough time to make my application before the rules changes? You've got 12 days. I mean, your company can apply for a priority service for kind of the application, but they need to be working on this right now. You need to be you need to be doing this like ASAP. The other thing is that maybe your SOC code will be different. Like, potentially, could you position yourself for a new SOC code? Does your role kind of align with other jobs as well? I don't know what job you have. So if you can also look and do some research into other SOC codes that are similar to your role title, that could also help. Manil's asked, I've been with this company for almost 5 years, 3 years in India, and almost 2 years doing part-time since I'm a student. On the graduate visa, the contract was made on a permanent part-time. I'm kind of got the ball rolling for current new opening and divisions of companies. There are management changes. I'm confused about my next step. Should I make a presentation about the scenario and future stuff, or have some different approach if there's any? I think definitely making a business case, you have a strong layer for a business case. You've worked for this company essentially for 5 years. You know it in and out. That's probably like the best situation that you can be in. But I think that, remember how we talked about going away, looking at where you've created value, then creating a presentation of some kind, and then speaking to a stakeholder. That's the kind of perspective that I would take, and that approach, given that you've been there long enough. I think that you can show that. My visa expires in 4 months, and my employers are still taking their time to carefully think about getting a sponsor license, which they were set on, but now it's a bit difficult with the new rules. How would you suggest navigate this? And I wonder what your experience is like timelines wise, as I feel like 4 months is super tight. Not necessarily. You can take it can usually takes around 3 months to get a sponsor license, and then go through the process of sponsorship. I would say that you do need to let them know that it does take that 3-month kind of time frame. So it's worth them moving slightly ahead. I don't know why what's been difficult with the new rules. If you need them to speak to an immigration advisor, remember I said I do like 15-minute consultations for free. So I'm happy to speak to them if you need me to do that. But I have to do it with your employer. Like, if you want me to speak to you and then to speak to your employer and vouch for you, like, that is a different thing. I only really will just talk to an employer and then give them the connection of the legal aid if they need it. My company holds a COS, but due to significant administrative challenges faced by our HR department in the past, sponsoring employees is currently not supported as a company policy. Could you please explain the responsibilities of HR when a company sponsors an employee? What solutions they can propose to help? Okay. My answer to that is, if it's a company policy, it's not worth your time. And I would start looking at other employers and start approaching the job market. The reason for that is because from a compliance perspective, there will be someone that has to be doing this work within the business. And a lot of the time, like HR, just whether it's capacity, whether it's admin, for whatever reason, they don't want to be doing this level of compliance and admin, and you can't actually fight them on that if that is their internal policy, because that is kind of, I think, what you have to be prepared for. Like, that's just what they've said. So you have to take it at face value. And that's a really difficult one to negotiate. Like, if that is literally in their guidebook, we don't sponsor, you kind of have to take it at what it is. And I think you have to start looking, unfortunately, for new jobs. Sorry, I feel like I'm being really rushed, but I just want to finish before 7. So Bella's asked, hi, Karina, I just wanted to double check on this, as I haven't seen it clearly stated anywhere. I'm 27, but on a graduate visa. Yes, you are still eligible. Yes, it doesn't matter. As long as you're going from graduate visa to skilled worker, yes, you are still eligible for PSW. Oh, and your salary is 37K OTE, but because your base is 30, you need to have the base higher than the threshold. The commission doesn't count. I had the same problem when I was in sales. So I hear you, but you need to be on 33K as a base if you want to get sponsored. There will be a recording that will be shared after this as well. So my target role is no longer available. Is it possible for me to get a COS first before 22nd and apply a bit later? No, you have to submit it before the 22nd of July. However, there might be a COS code that is more relevant to your role title. So I think that's when you have to work with a lawyer, because they're the ones that have access and understand how to amend certain jobs to certain different codes. Okay. I'm just gonna, oh God, sorry. There's a lot of just questions still coming through. So
Karina, can I say something?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Sorry, you gave me
Sorry. I love your call and everything in negotiation, and I've been in the same situation. I actually went from a spousal visa to a skilled visa, and one of the things I negotiated was to my settlement, so I paid half of the cost, and in my settlement they agreed on getting that back if I didn't make the 3 or 5 year. So I don't know if that's something to consider as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bree, for jumping in. I'm really grateful that
you're
part of the
I don't mean to.
No, it was awesome. But it's true. Yes. Negotiating some of the costs back is something that you can say to an employer. And I mentioned that earlier around, in the contract, it says if you leave within the first year, the first 2 years, you have to pay the cost of the visa back, which is like a safeguard. I don't advocate for these things because I do still think that it's so much money for so many people that having that extra worry, but it is a good negotiation tactic for sure. I've seen it done. I've seen people do it successfully. So well done as well for you for doing that too.
Thank you, Karina.
No worries. Okay. I stopped at Barnita. So Barnita, I feel like this is something that I know you're a Migrates member, so we can also talk about this on the Q&A on Monday in more depth. I've looked at this already, so I know a little bit about your situation. The challenges you're facing is you haven't spoken to your manager, you're sure how you need for salary increase for sponsorship. So this is I feel like maybe this is something we should talk about on Monday, because it's definitely more in depth, and I want to take probably 15 minutes to answer this question for you. So please come on the Q&A and we can talk about it then and there as well. But what I will say is that don't worry about the fact that that role title won't exist after December 2026, because you will, if you are able to get sponsored on it before then, you are going to be fine. In the case of you can continue down that path, you can extend it, because they've given that kind of time frame until then for you to get on that path anyway. So I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about the titles. Also, the titles is something that is an immigration advisor is the one that has to decide, or your employer has to decide which title is more relevant to your job. So actually you fixating on it is not even really that necessary. I would just tell them that this is minimum salary you have to meet, and then have them understand, okay, which role is more kind of adjacent to the work that you're doing. And if they're confused about it, again, super happy to speak to them, to connect them to an immigration lawyer, because those are the actual people that can advise them on what works for the business, for the job, and what kind of application they should make. But let's talk about it on Monday, because I'd love to talk about it more in depth on our Q&A that's happening that evening. Okay, so I am unfortunately out of time. But if you are a Migrates member, like I said, I'm doing a Q&A on Monday. They typically go on for an hour and a half, 2 hours, where we discuss a lot of people's personal questions and situations. So really happy to answer any questions on that call if you're a Migrates member. If you're not a Migrates member, if you are just visiting us on a trial, or you've just popped in to be part of this call, feel free to sit in on that session. You have access to Migrates for a week, and you can listen and learn a little bit more. Or if you'd like to join Migrates, feel free to do so. We're here to support you guys. And yeah, hopefully you guys have learned a bit on this session today. I will be sharing the call after this call is over. I will be sharing the call by email, but it's also inside the platform, so you can also watch it back. Good luck, everyone. I know it's a really stressful time. We will have an immigration lawyer also discussing some of these changes very soon. So bear with us, because, well, actually it's already in the diary. It will be happening the week of the 22nd of July. Thanks, guys, and speak to y'all later. Have a good evening.